a tank here? This is a residential street.
Now try to tow this, dear HOA.
I woke up to that weird quiet you only notice when something's wrong. No engine sounds, no birds, just empty air where my car should have been. I stepped outside in yesterday's t-shirt, squinting at the driveway like it might blink and fix itself. Nothing. Just faint toe marks and a little oil smudge where my tires used to sit. For a second I thought I'd parked somewhere else, like maybe my brain was buffering. Then it hit me. My car was gone. No warning on the door. No bright orange sticker. No email. No text. Just gone. I checked the street, then the side lot, then walked halfway down the block like the car might have wandered off on its own. Neighbors peeked through blinds, pretending not to stare. One guy across the street gave me that look that says, "Yeah, I saw it happen, but I'm not getting involved." Classic HOA energy. I pulled out my phone and checked the HOA portal. Nothing. No violation notice. No courtesy reminder. Just the same boring announcements about trash bins and lawn height. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from Karen. Short. Smug. Your vehicle was towed for unauthorized overnight parking. I actually laughed. Out loud. Unauthorized? I checked the bylaws immediately. Section, subsection, footnotes. Overnight parking was allowed in driveways. Always had been. My car was registered, visible, and exactly where it was supposed to be. I screenshotted everything because experience had taught me that paper trails matter more than feelings. I marched over to Karen's place, screenshots ready. She answered the door already holding her clipboard like she'd been waiting. Pink blazer, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, lips pressed tight. She didn't invite me in. She didn't need to. She said my car violated community standards. Not a rule. Not a section. Standards. I told her that wasn't a thing. She smiled and said the board agreed. I asked which board members voted. She waved the clipboard. I asked where the notice was. She said it was implied. That word again. Implied. I told her I was compliant. She shrugged and said towing was final. No appeal. No discussion. Just done. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. She did it on purpose. I could see it in her face, that little spark of satisfaction. She wanted to see how far she could push. She wanted me inconvenienced, embarrassed, boxed in. And for about 10 seconds it worked. I walked back home and sat on the front steps, staring at the empty driveway. Neighbors started drifting closer, whispering. Someone asked if I was okay. I nodded. Inside something flipped. Not anger. Not panic. Just calm. The kind of calm you get right before you decide to be petty in a very specific way. See, what Karen didn't know was that my driveway wasn't just a slab of concrete. It was zoned private, reinforced, and rated for way more weight than a sedan. Years ago, long before Karen discovered the joy of clipboards, I'd arranged to have something parked there temporarily. Something big. Something legal. Something unforgettable. I made one phone call. Then another. No yelling. No threats. Just logistics. By late afternoon, word had spread that something was coming. Neighbors gathered like it was a block party. Phones out. Kids on bikes. Even Karen stood at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching. When the transport rolled in, the street went dead silent. The ground vibrated. A 20-ton tank eased into view, slow and deliberate, steel tracks clanking like punctuation marks. It rolled straight up my driveway and stopped perfectly centered, engine idling, massive and immovable. Karen's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. She marched over, clipboard shaking, shouting that it was illegal, unsafe, outrageous. I reminded her calmly that driveway parking was allowed. She said this wasn't a vehicle. I said the bylaws didn't specify size. The city official who showed up just stared at the tank, then at Karen, then back at the tank. That's when I realized she'd finally met something she couldn't tow. Karen didn't even pretend this was about rules anymore. She leaned against her porch railing like a cop in a bad movie, pink blazer perfectly pressed, clipboard tucked under her arm, smirk locked and loaded. The kind of smirk that says she's enjoying this way too much. She started explaining the fines and towing fees like she was reading a restaurant menu. Flat rate. Daily storage. Administrative processing. She emphasized each number slowly, watching my reaction like it was entertainment. She told me she was protecting community standards, drawing air quotes with one hand while the other clutched that clipboard like it was a badge. According to her, my car set a tone. Not illegal, not unsafe, just the wrong vibe. I asked her again to show me the exact rule I violated. She flipped pages dramatically, stopped on a blank sheet, and said the board had discretion. Discretion. That word did a lot of work for her. I pulled up the bylaws on my phone and showed her the section on driveway parking. Highlighted. Clear as day. She didn't even glance at it. She waved it away like I was showing her a meme. Said the board could interpret the rules as needed. I pointed out that interpretation didn't mean making stuff up. She laughed, short and sharp, and said I should take it up with the board. Then she reminded me she was the board. At least that's how she acted. Neighbors hovered nearby pretending to check their mail or water plants. Everyone was listening. Karen loved that part. She raised her voice just enough so people could hear her talk about consequences. Towing wasn't personal, she said. It was enforcement. She made a big deal about how expensive it was going to be for me to get my car back, like she was hoping I'd beg or snap. I didn't either. I asked her why there was no warning. She said warnings weren't required for repeat issues. I asked when it had happened before. She paused for half a second too long, then said it was documented. I asked where. She tapped the clipboard again. That clipboard was doing Olympic-level gymnastics, carrying her whole argument. She told me I should be thankful she didn't fine me more. That's when I realized she genuinely believed she was doing me a favor. In her head, she was the hero of this story. The guardian of order. The parking police. Pink blazer, clipboard, fake authority energy turned up to 11. I told her calmly that I'd be disputing the tow. She shrugged and said disputes take weeks. Storage fees pile up fast. She smiled again like she was already counting my money. That's when it clicked for me. This wasn't about compliance. It was about control. She wanted to see how far she could push before someone pushed back. As she talked, she kept glancing at my driveway, empty and quiet, like she was proud of herself. That empty space was her trophy. She told a neighbor walking by that this was a learning moment for everyone. The neighbor nodded awkwardly and kept walking. Nobody wanted to be next. I asked her one last time to reconsider. Told her she was wrong and this would blow back. She leaned closer and lowered her voice like she was sharing a secret. She said people like me always think the rules apply to them. She said the HOA had ways of handling that. Then she straightened up and told me the conversation was over. I walked away without another word. Not because I was defeated, but because I was done talking. I sat back on my porch and watched her retreat, clipboard swinging confidently at her side. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd just taught me a lesson about authority. What she didn't know was that I wasn't stressed about my car. I wasn't scrambling for a ride. I wasn't worried about fees. I was thinking about the driveway. The space she just cleared for me. The rules she was so proud of enforcing. The exact wording she'd ignored. Because while she was busy playing parking police, she had no clue what I actually owned, what I was legally allowed to park there, or how badly her little power trip was about to backfire. And that's when I realized she'd just made the biggest mistake of her HOA career. I vented the way everyone does after HOA nonsense. Group text, caps lock, sarcasm, maybe a little swearing. I told my friends my car got towed for no reason and Karen was acting like she just seized contraband. The replies came fast. Sympathy first. Then jokes. One guy said I should park a monster truck. Another said a cement mixer. Someone else dropped, "Bro, park something they can't tow." It was half joking, half wishful thinking, but it planted a seed. I laughed it off at first. Then I remembered something most people forget I even have. Years ago, through a private collector network and a museum partnership, I legally acquired a decommissioned, registered 20-ton tank. Permitted, documented, insured. Street legal for transport, driveway legal for storage. I hadn't thought about it in years because normal people don't. But suddenly it felt very relevant. I dug out the paperwork just to make sure my memory wasn't playing tricks on me. Registration documents. Transport permits. Storage approvals. Everything still valid. The tank wasn't a weapon. No armaments. Just steel, tracks, and history. A giant hunk of legal machinery that had been sitting quietly in storage, waiting for a moment. Apparently this was the moment. Before doing anything dumb, I checked zoning rules. Not HOA vibes. Actual city code. Residential driveway use. Vehicle definitions. Weight limits. Size restrictions. Overnight parking language. I read every line twice. Then a third time because it sounded too good to be true. The rules talked about cars, trucks, RVs, trailers. Nothing about tracked vehicles. Nothing about size beyond not blocking sidewalks or roads. I cross-checked the HOA bylaws too. Same deal. No restrictions on vehicle type beyond legally owned and permitted. No weight caps. No length limits. No clause saying no tanks. Karen had been very proud of her rules, but she'd never bothered to close that loophole. The more I read, the calmer I got. This wasn't a stunt. This was compliance turned up to 11. I sent a screenshot to the group chat. Silence for a second. Then chaos. Laughing emojis. No way. You wouldn't. Bro, do it. One friend asked if I was serious. I said dead serious. Another said Karen would lose her mind. That sealed it. Petty? Maybe. Legal? Absolutely. Sometimes the best response to abuse of power is malicious compliance. I made a few calls. Logistics, not drama. Transport company that specializes in heavy equipment. Permits for movement. Timing. Everything clean, above board, boringly official. The guy on the phone didn't even blink. He just asked for the address and weight rating. When I told him the HOA situation, he laughed and said, "Seen worse." That night I slept better than I had in days. Not because my car was gone, but because the stress flipped into anticipation. Karen thought she'd cornered me. She thought she controlled my driveway. What she really did was clear it. A perfect slab of concrete, zone private, ready for something unforgettable. The next morning I walked out and looked at the empty space where my car used to be. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a stage. Neighbors waved. One asked if I was okay. I smiled and said I had a plan. Word travels fast in HOA land. By lunchtime, people were already whispering. By the time the transport was scheduled, I'd checked everything one last time. Permits, emails, rules, screenshots saved, backup copies. Karen loved paperwork until it worked against her. I was about to give her a live demonstration of what within the rules really looks like. And the rules didn't say I couldn't. The sound came first, low and heavy like thunder that forgot to echo. I was half awake when it rolled through the neighborhood, vibrating windows and rattling the cheap wind chimes people hang outside like they do something. At first I thought it was a garbage truck, then maybe construction, but this was deeper, slower, meaner. I stepped outside in sweats with a coffee still burning my hand and watched headlights crawl down the street like something prehistoric was waking up. The flatbed turned the corner and everything changed. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't quiet. It was a full-on steel-plated tank sitting on the back like it owned the place. Trax hull. Turret shell. No weaponry, just raw mass. 20 tons of perfectly legal, don't mess with me. The driver eased it to a stop right in front of my house like this was just another Tuesday. Diesel fumes hung in the air, and somewhere a dog started losing its mind. Lights flicked on up and down the block. Curtains twitched. Phones came out. One neighbor stepped onto their porch in a robe, squinting like they were trying to process a dream. Another yelled, "Is that real?" I just nodded and took a sip of coffee like this was all part of my morning routine. The transport crew hopped out, calm as can be, like they unload tanks before breakfast all the time. The unloading process was slow and deliberate. Chains clanked. Ramps lowered. The tank rolled forward inch by inch, metal on metal, the sound scraping straight into your bones. The driveway groaned but held because it was rated for more than Karen ever bothered to check. When those tracks finally hit my concrete, the whole street felt it. Not loud, just final. That's when Karen appeared. Pink blazer. Clipboard clutched to her chest like a life raft. Hair already in chaos, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing without words for a solid 5 seconds. She looked from the tank to me, back to the tank, then down at her clipboard like it might explain what the hell she was seeing. I swear I saw her soul leave her body for a moment. She marched up fast, heels clicking like she was trying to intimidate a machine built for war. "This is absolutely not allowed," she snapped, voice shaking. I didn't even answer. The transport supervisor did. Come. Polite. Paperwork in hand. Permits. Registrations. City approvals. He spoke like someone who's done this dance before. Karen waved her clipboard like it outranked federal ink. It didn't. Neighbors gathered closer now, full semicircle, phones out, whispering. Someone laughed. Someone else said, "No way." A kid asked if it was a movie. Karen started ranting about safety, property values, aesthetics, the usual HOA greatest hits. The tank just sat there, unmoved, sun glinting off steel like it was mocking her. She tried to threaten fines. I asked which bylaw. She flipped pages. Tried towing. The driver laughed and said good luck. She yelled that it was illegal. I asked her to point to the rule. She couldn't. Her face went red, then pale, then red again. Clipboard shaking now. Full meltdown energy. The crew finished up, had me sign a form, and rolled their flatbed away, leaving behind silence and one very permanent statement. The tank sat perfectly centered in my driveway, not blocking sidewalks, not touching the street, not breaking a single rule. Karen screamed something about calling the city, the police, the mayor, probably the moon. I just waved. And that's when Karen lost her mind. Karen absolutely lost it the second the tank settled into my driveway, screaming about safety, intimidation, and military hardware, like she'd just discovered a missile silo next to her begonias. She waved her clipboard at anyone who would look, telling neighbors this was an emergency situation and that the HOA would be taking immediate action. People were filming nonstop now, phones held high, whispering stuff like "no way" and "is this real" while Karen paced in tight circles. Within minutes my inbox exploded, HOA emails stacking up faster than spam, all marked urgent, all written in that dramatic tone they save for fake crises. Karen fired off message after message about community safety, intimidation tactics, and unapproved military equipment, like she was auditioning for cable news. She CC'd everyone, including people who moved out years ago, and somehow my name was bolded and read like I was a threat to civilization. Neighbors started replying all, which only made it better, asking simple questions like what rule did he break and why is this happening. Karen responded to every single one with paragraphs of nonsense, quoting bylaws that didn't exist and inventing phrases like tactical vehicle disruption. At one point she accused me of trying to scare families, which was rich considering the only person yelling was her. The tank didn't move, didn't make a sound, just sat there quietly ruining her entire narrative. By mid-morning the HOA was in full panic mode, sending out emergency meeting invites and warning residents not to approach my driveway. That only drew a bigger crowd because telling people not to look is basically an invitation. Someone brought lawn chairs, someone else cracked jokes, and Karen looked like she was about to short-circuit. She tried threatening fines again, shouting numbers that sounded made up, and promised daily penalties until the tank was removed. I asked her calmly where in the bylaws tanks were prohibited and she just stared at me. Her face did this twitchy thing like Windows 95 freezing, and she flipped through pages she'd clearly never read. That's when she announced she was calling the city, loud enough for every phone camera to catch. She stepped aside, dialed dramatically, and started explaining how a resident had deployed military hardware to intimidate the neighborhood. People laughed, some shook their heads, and one guy said, "Dude, this is better than Netflix." Karen shot him a look like she'd add his name to a list later. The call ended with her nodding aggressively, convinced she'd just summoned backup. She marched back over, pointed at the tank and said, "Enjoy it while you can." Neighbors leaned in, phones steady, waiting for whatever came next. I just shrugged because I already knew this wasn't going to end the way she thought. By lunchtime the street felt like a block party mixed with a courtroom drama. Every ding of a phone brought new speculation about fines, lawsuits, and viral videos. Karen kept pacing, muttering about authority and respect, sweating through that pink blazer. She tried cornering me again, warning this would reflect poorly on my record. I reminded her records require rules and rules require facts. That line got a few quiet chuckles from the crowd. Someone yelled, "Ask the city if concrete is scared of tanks," and Karen snapped. She accused everyone of harassment now, even though she started the circus. The HOA president tried calling her, but she ignored it to stay on her rant. Emails kept flying, subject lines getting more desperate by the minute. One warned about insurance exposure, another begged for calm. Karen read none of them, too busy policing a tank with a clipboard. The absurdity hit me then, how far she'd pushed this over a parked car. Neighbors swapped stories about old fines and petty warnings she'd handed out. This tank wasn't just metal, it was a mirror. It showed everyone what unchecked authority looks like when it meets reality. Karen finally finished her call, confidence back for about 3 seconds. She announced the city was on their way like it was a victory lap. A hush fell, anticipation thick enough to taste. Phones steadied, neighbors leaned forward, and Karen smiled like she'd won. I checked my watch and thought about how funny timing can be. Because the city wasn't coming to save her. They were coming to ask questions she really didn't want to answer. And that realization crept across her face a second too late. The crowd buzzed, the tank sat silent, and the chaos Karen unleashed finally circled back. Somewhere down the road, sirens started getting closer. Karen straightened her blazer, lifted her clipboard, and prepared to argue with reality. Everyone waited, knowing this showdown was about to flip the script. And for the first time, Karen looked nervous. That's when I realized calling the city was the worst move she could have made. Because this mess was about to get officially expensive. And she had no idea. The police rolled in first, 2 cruisers easing up like this was just another noise complaint, until they saw the tank. Both officers slowed, exchanged a look, and one of them actually sighed like he'd already had a long day and it wasn't even noon. The city inspector pulled in right behind them, clipboard of his own tucked under his arm, hard hat on, expression neutral. The crowd went quiet fast. Karen straightened her blazer like she was about to testify in court. The first officer asked the basic questions, calm voice, hands relaxed. "Whose vehicle is this?" I raised my hand. He nodded and asked if I had paperwork. I did. Permits, registration, zoning approval, all neat and boring, the kind of stuff nobody reads until it matters. The inspector stepped closer, circled the tank slowly, tapping notes into his tablet. He checked the VIN, confirmed the demilitarized status, and asked about weapon systems. I explained there were none, just steel and history. He nodded again. Karen couldn't stay quiet. She jumped in with a rant about intimidation, fear, and military hardware in a residential zone. The inspector finally looked at her and asked if she had documentation showing it was prohibited. She waved her clipboard like a wand and said it was obvious. He didn't smile. He asked for the rule. She couldn't produce one. The officer shifted his weight, already sensing where this was going. The inspector confirmed it out loud, clear enough for every phone recording. Fully legal. Registered. Non-operational. Zoned correctly. Approved for static display on private property. No violations. A couple neighbors whispered, "Holy crap." Someone quietly said she really messed up. Karen's face tightened, jaw clenched so hard it looked like it hurt. Then the officer turned to Karen and asked a simple question that sucked all the air out of her little performance. He asked why my car had been towed in the first place. She blinked, clearly not expecting that pivot. She launched into overnight parking rules, community standards, and enforcement authority. The officer asked if she was the property owner. No. If she was law enforcement. No. If she had written authorization from the HOA board. She hesitated. The inspector asked to see the tow authorization. Karen flipped pages fast, sweat forming at her hairline. She handed over a form that looked like it had been printed that morning. The officer frowned and asked who signed it. She said she did. He asked under what authority. Silence. Someone in the crowd let out a low wow. The officer explained, slowly like talking to a child, that towing a legally parked vehicle from private property without proper authorization could be considered unlawful. Karen tried to argue, saying she was protecting the community. The inspector cut in and said communities don't get protected by breaking the law. That hit different. Phones zoomed in. Karen's voice cracked as she insisted the HOA would back her. The officer asked if the HOA was present. It wasn't. He asked if there was a board vote. There wasn't. He asked if I was notified. I wasn't. The silence stretched, awkward and brutal. One neighbor shook their head like they'd been waiting for this moment for years. The inspector confirmed my driveway met all zoning requirements, including weight load. He even complimented the concrete. That earned a laugh. Karen glared at him like he'd betrayed her personally. The officer then explained the potential consequences of unauthorized towing, using words like liability and restitution. Karen's posture shrank with every sentence. Someone asked if the tank could stay. The inspector said yes. Someone else asked if the tow company would be investigated. The officer said likely. Karen tried one last push, claiming intimidation again. The officer looked at the tank, then at her, and said intimidation usually involves movement. This hasn't moved. They got a few snorts. Karen's clipboard trembled in her hands now. The officer asked her to step aside for a private conversation. The crowd leaned in anyway. Whatever he said wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Karen nodded stiffly, eyes darting, confidence completely gone. The city inspector packed up, satisfied, and told me to have a good day. The officers did the same. As they walked away, one of them muttered that this was the weirdest call he'd had all week. The crowd slowly dispersed, buzzing with excitement. Karen stood there alone, staring at the tank like it had personally betrayed her. And that's when they asked Karen why my car was towed. The fallout didn't come with sirens or shouting, it came quietly, and somehow that made it hit harder. A few hours after the police and city inspector left, the tow company truck rolled back onto the street, slower this time, like it knew it wasn't the hero of the story anymore. The driver avoided eye contact, dropped my car back into the driveway without a word, and handed me paperwork that basically admitted the tow was improper. Not misunderstood. Not gray area. Improper. That word felt good. By the end of the day, an official HOA email hit everyone's inbox. Subject line was painfully neutral, something like parking enforcement update. Inside, the tone was stiff and legal, the kind of writing that screams damage control. The board acknowledged that the tow had been unauthorized, that proper procedures were not followed, and that all related fees would be refunded immediately. No apology yet, just facts, but everyone knew who that was aimed at. Karen didn't show up to the emergency HOA meeting that night. Instead, the vice president ran it, sweating through his polo while reading off prepared statements. Neighbors packed the room. Some stood along the walls. Others joined on Zoom and forgot to mute themselves while whispering commentary. When the board announced that Karen was being removed from all parking enforcement duties effective immediately, there was this low, collective murmur, like a crowd trying not to cheer in a courtroom. They cited abuse of authority and failure to follow established procedures. Again, very polite words for what was basically a power trip gone wrong. Someone asked if she'd face any personal consequences. The board said that matter was under review. That answer didn't satisfy everyone, but it was enough to let people breathe. The next morning, another update dropped. Shorter this time. Karen had been formally cited by the city for issuing unauthorized enforcement actions. Nothing dramatic, just enough to put a mark on her record. The kind of thing that follows you around quietly. The board confirmed she was no longer permitted to issue warnings, fines, or directives of any kind. Her clipboard powers were officially revoked. What shocked me wasn't that she lost authority. It was how fast the neighborhood flipped. People who barely waved before suddenly stopped to talk. Neighbors knocked on my door with coffee, donuts, even beer. One guy admitted his car had been towed twice by Karen and he just paid to make it stop. Another woman said she'd been fined for chalk on the sidewalk. Someone else mentioned a warning for leaving their trash can out 12 minutes too long. Stories poured out like everyone had been waiting for permission to speak. Group chats exploded. Screenshots of old emails, fines, warnings, all shared openly now. People compared notes and realized the pattern. It wasn't enforcement. It was control. And once the illusion cracked, it shattered everywhere. Karen's name became shorthand. Pulling a Karen meant overreaching. Someone even joked about making tank-shaped cookies for the next block party. Karen herself disappeared. Curtains stayed closed. Her car didn't move for days. When she finally did step outside, she kept her head down, no clipboard, no blazer, just a regular person suddenly stripped of imagined power. Nobody yelled at her. Nobody confronted her. That silence was louder than anything. Authority thrives on attention. Take that away and there's nothing left. The HOA tried to smooth things over, promising reforms, oversight, transparency. New committees. New rules about rules. People listened but differently now. Questions got asked. Votes got counted. Blind trust was gone. And it wasn't coming back. I stood in my driveway that evening, looking at my returned car and the tank parked calmly beside it, and felt something close to peace. Not triumph. Just balance restored. Karen wanted to flex power without limits. Reality flexed back. But what really got me was later that night when a kid from down the street biked past, pointed at the tank and said, "That's the guy who beat the HOA." His dad laughed and corrected him. "No," he said. "That's the guy who made them follow their own rules." That stuck with me. Because this was never about the tank. It was about stopping a bully with paperwork and patience, then letting the truth do the rest. Karen thought authority was loud. Turns out, accountability is louder. And the neighborhood? They didn't just watch it happen. They learned from it. That was the real consequence. The tank didn't move the next day or the day after that, and that silence was louder than any argument Karen ever made. It sat there in my driveway like a calm, steel reminder that some lines, once crossed, don't uncross themselves. Neighbors walked by slower now, pretending to check their phones while sneaking photos. Kids asked questions. Parents gave half answers. Nobody complained. Not a single email, not a single note, not even a passive-aggressive smile. It turns out people only hate rules when they're weaponized, and once that weapon was gone, the neighborhood exhaled. A week passed and the tank became background scenery. Delivery drivers stopped staring. Joggers waved. One guy joked that property values probably went up because at least nobody was stealing packages anymore. The HOA sent out a carefully worded update saying the vehicle was compliant and temporarily permitted. Temporarily did a lot of heavy lifting there, but nobody challenged it. Karen sure didn't. She rerouted her daily walks to avoid my side of the street entirely, like my driveway was radioactive. Behind the scenes, the board scrambled. Emergency meetings, long agendas, lawyers on speakerphone. They rewrote the towing policy from scratch, adding layers of approval, documentation, and actual due process. No more clipboard justice. No more lone wolves making calls. Every change felt like a quiet admission of guilt. They never said my name, but everyone knew why it was happening. The tank didn't need to move to keep doing its job. Weeks rolled on and something funny happened. The neighborhood got calmer. Fewer warnings. Fewer threats. More conversations. People asked questions at meetings and actually got answers. Someone joked that the tank scared the nonsense right out of the bylaws. Maybe it did. Or maybe it just reminded everyone that power only works when people believe in it. Karen never did come near my driveway again. If she saw me from across the street, she'd suddenly need to check her mail or adjust her shoe or vanish behind a parked SUV. The pink blazer disappeared. The clipboard was gone for good. Without her props, she looked smaller somehow, just another person who flew too close to the sun and got burned. One afternoon a city official stopped by, not to inspect, just to say hi. He laughed, said the story made the rounds downtown, and told me I'd accidentally become a case study in overreach. He asked how long I planned to keep the tank there. I said probably a bit longer. He nodded like he understood completely. Eventually the tank did leave quietly on another flatbed early one morning. No drama. No crowd. Just a low rumble and a few neighbors watching from porches with coffee cups. By then it had already done what it needed to do. The driveway felt empty again, but lighter, like something heavy had been lifted from more than just concrete. The HOA sent one last update about community harmony and mutual respect. It was almost funny. Almost. I parked my car where it belonged and no one touched it. No notes. No threats. No towing. Just normal life restored. What stuck with me most was how fast confidence turns into compliance once accountability shows up. People stopped whispering and started speaking. A neighbor who barely nodded before thanked me for standing my ground. Another admitted they'd been scared of fines for years over dumb stuff like mailbox paint and lawn edging. It was wild how one absurd moment cracked open a backlog of quiet resentment. The tank didn't scare people, it gave them permission. Even the vibe on the street changed. Block parties came back. Kids chalked the sidewalks without fear of citations. Someone grilled burgers right on their driveway and laughed about it. The HOA still existed, sure, but it felt smaller, more human, less like an authority and more like a service. That shift mattered. It proved rules can exist without ego attached. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just lived my life, which turned out to be the biggest flex of all. Karen avoided eye contact like it was an Olympic sport, and that was enough. Justice doesn't always need a victory lap. Sometimes it just needs consistency and a little bit of audacity. The whole thing reminded me that petty power hates sunlight, and once you drag it out where everyone can see it, it shrivels fast. No shouting, no threats, just patience and receipts, and suddenly the bully has nowhere left to stand. Sometimes people ask if it was worth it. The stress, the attention, the chaos. I tell them yeah, because it wasn't about winning. It was about drawing a line so clear even a tank wasn't overkill. Karen wanted to make a point with power she didn't have. I just showed her what real limits look like. They towed my car to prove a point, so I parked a tank and proved they never had one.